This is Space Cat's Peace Turtles, the unofficial podcast for Fantasy Flight's Twilight Imperium.
Episode 97.
The Federation of Soul Strategy Guide.
Music by Ben Prunty, featuring Matt Martins and Hunter Donaldson.
Well, maybe that's what we'll do, is we'll just repeat the bits from before with better because it's like we're not trying to improve the bits.
No,
you know what I
no,
mean?
the bits
we're
were
not
perfect the
We're not
first time
doing a
around.
second go on all of these guides so that we can get better bits for the beginning of the episode. Everybody, and let's be honest, everybody's least favorite part of the show. The main problem with this show, and I'll say it right now, is that it's you, Matt, a serious board game nerd dweebus, and me, Hunter, a guy that, I sort of play the game. I don't really play it. I've never played it, ever. That's actually something I want to say on the record before we start getting really serious back into strategy talk. I've never played this game. I just kind of play it by ear. You know what I mean?
Just reads it. He just reads it, man.
I just read a lot about it, and I like talking about it, to be
He's
fair.
a go with the flow kind of guy.
I'm a go with the flow kind of guy, and I think it's perfect that we are finally really starting the show over. You know what I mean? Like really getting back into the nitty gritty of what this show should be. Are you excited about that, Matt?
So it's funny because we've been working on this Soul Guide for kind of a while in terms of like playing test games and stuff. Mm-hmm. And what I've learned is I hate Soul. Like on that end, I don't enjoy it. But as soon as we sat down and started like hashing out the details, boy, it felt like it was like good to be home again kind of feeling. Like, oh, here we are. This is the show. This is why we came around.
So this, I think, marks the end of what has been kind of a theory crafty part of the show. We've had way too many episodes lately where it's the show talking about the show.
Yeah, right. That happens a lot.
Yeah, and that is, I just want to assure everybody that is over, and we are back to meat. Just meat. We've got some juicy steak for you here today. I have no idea how long this episode is going to be. We are committed to it not being separated by parts, so we might be here for a minute. Basically, it took. This is like the old days. If you guys know, when we started the show, it took us way too long to prepare an episode. That's how it was today.
Yeah,
and the episode's going to go way too long. Longer than a podcast should be. But that's what this show is, and that's what we need to accept, Matt.
And it should be stated, if you're hanging around for the first time, this is a great place to be, because our goal is to really hit these guides from the ground up. We've done guides before, and those are decent to get an understanding of things, but there is some stuff that it was too early on. We got stuff wrong. Things have changed. Just the meta in general has shifted. So this is a more thorough look at what Soul looks like today. Mm-hmm. So I'm excited just to have something new for people to crunch their heads around. Because we're really
crunch your heads around.
This
that's a
is
sentence.
your Soul Guide.
Yeah,
this is your Soul Guide, and we
you
want it
gotta
to be
really
that way.
crunch your head around. What?
Leave me alone. Why would you do this to me?
Hashtag, if you could
crunch your head around it.
This week, if you guys review the show, if you could say this is one of the crunchiest podcasts for your head.
These two are some real head crunchers.
Yeah, we're gonna get really head crunchy today. Let's get right into it. Today we're going to talk about the Federation of Soul. If you listen to our original Federation of Soul episode, you can just go ahead and throw that guy out. Everything we have in this version is going to be better and more updated and more succinct and more exact. That's the idea.
And the other big improvement to the formula is we have done pre-errata. If you're familiar with the show, errata is something we do at the end of the episode where we pick up on stuff we messed up last week. Well, we decided these guides need to not be something where you listen to part of it here, and then you got to check in next week for the last 20 minutes to get like the rest of the guide. So we hit up the community last week and said, tell us your thoughts on Soul so that we can include it in the guide. So if you stick around to the end, there's going to be points that disagree with things we've said in here, so that hopefully you get an overall look at Soul, not just how do Hunter and Matt play Soul. It is hopefully you have all the information you need to make your own assessment.
Right. And our goal with this show from the very beginning has been to present to you, this is how me and Matt think of this faction. This is how me and Matt think of this concept within the board game itself. This is not the only way to think about it.
Definitely
and the community frequently disagrees with us. And we just want that to be a part of the show. That is just another element of it.
As a last point to go deeper into that, like the whole point of this is we can't ever say our suggestions are final or the best. We've been playing a lot of Root recently, just in preparation for just thinking about that game. And Root and games like Root are a thing where there is a strategy that works, right? There's a thing that you should do, and it is the way to make things happen the best way almost every time. And like, you don't have to stray from that. We have our best suggestions, but Twilight Imperium is not that kind of game in general. Right. Like, there's always an alternate path. There's always a different way to do things. The game is too complex.
Yeah. All right. And with that that disclaimer, that's really similar to the disclaimer we did before, actually, at the beginning of our guides the first time. Let's start this journey once again.
Yes.
Matt, tell me about the Federation of Soul. Let's do a quick overview and brush up on all the old details.
So we're going to cover all their basic things. First things up is let's just talk about what they start with. They start with Neural Motivator and Anti-Mass Deflectors as tech. That's the ability to basically draw an extra card in the status phase, and the ability to move through asteroid fields. Not a big deal, but blue-green is a great start for them. They start with these units: 2 carriers, 5 infantry, 1 destroyer, 3 fighters, 1 space dock. If you listen to our old guides, and just in general, we talk about the concept of 1C4I. 1C... 2C. I'm sorry. 2C, 4I. 2C is 2 carriers. 4I is 4 infantry. That's the best start you can have, or like the most fundamental start you can have, to take 2 systems near your home system, right? That's a way to get 4 planets very easily. And they have that plus an extra infantry and some fighters and stuff to defend. So it's a great starting fleet. No complaints there, basically.
Right, and great starting technology too. This is a good start overall.
Well, and we'll get into it, but it feeds directly into everything else they're going to do. It's kind of ridiculous how much they just got kind of the lottery here in terms of things they start with. Their home planet is a planet with 4 resources and 2 influence. You'll basically never use that influence, but it's 4 resources, which is what you want to start with. 4 resources means you can get a tech unimpeded, even if you're doing it off the secondary of tech. There's plenty of factions. In fact, what did we count out earlier? 8?
It's a little over half of the factions can always afford tech on round 1, basically. So you're one of the factions that can definitely afford tech, which is a big deal. Let's cover all of their abilities with just like quick little notes about what is good here. Their 2 faction abilities are Orbital Drop. As an action, you can spend a token from your strategy pool to place 2 infantry from your reinforcements on 1 planet you control. This is a great ability that we are going to propose you use pretty often. Because the whole thing about Soul is you're able to defend yourself very, very well, and this ability makes that even better. Now, can we break down real quick? One of the most important part of Orbital Drop to me is that you are getting to place 2 infantry on a planet without having to carry those infantry out. So sometimes I feel like newer players will look at that and be like, that seems like an awful lot to pay 1 CC for 2 infantry. That's almost like 3 in Unaligned Magi's term. Right. That would be 3 trade goods for 2 infantry, which is not a great deal. However, you're getting to place them wherever you want, that is the kicker. That is the important part that you should focus on.
Yeah. To be clear, Magi's math is actually 2 resources or 2 trade goods equals 3. It's weird, whatever. But the point is, yes, it feels like you're spending too much for 2 infantry, but what you're actually paying for is the ability to put them anywhere, not where you have a space dock and you don't have to carry them somewhere. What you're doing is dropping them somewhere and then taking them somewhere else even further away.
It allows you to get more infantry in in any place on the board faster than basically anybody else would, because everybody else has to build infantry, load them on the carriers, and then place them where they want them.
Yep. Your second ability is Versatile. When you gain command tokens during the status phase, gain 1 additional command token. You get an extra action per round. In some ways, people just think of this extra action as being what you're going to use for orbital drop, right? Like you do the same amount of actions, but you're also going to gain 2 free 2 infantry somewhere.
Right.
And that's a decent way to think about it. It's fun to think about, too, the fact that you can eventually get hypermetabolism, which gets you another command token per round. So you could be getting 4 command tokens per round. So Soul is just able to do more than any faction. And our goal with Soul is to exacerbate that and make that even bigger, which we'll talk more about later. But our strengths as Soul is the ability to do way more than anybody else per round.
Right. I would say that Soul, when it comes to command token dependency and also just how many command tokens they get, kind of rival, I would say, Necro and Jolnar as far as like their command token economy being really favorable. And it's all just from this ability. It's pretty basic. You just get 1 extra.
Yeah. The other 2 things we have to talk about with the Federation of Soul is they have 2 custom units. One is their carriers are different than a standard carrier, and their infantry are different. In both cases, it's pretty simple. Their basic carriers have 2 extra capacity, and their basic infantry fight 1 better, right? So a normal infantry hits on an 8, these guys hit on a 7. When you upgrade that, which means what their 2 faction techs are, is an advanced carrier, which increases that capacity to 8 and makes the movement 2. That's a huge deal. 8 capacity is double what everybody else is getting. And most people don't upgrade their carriers. And even those that do will only be set at 6. So for you can think of it as 2 to 4 extra fighters to just soak hits, or even more infantry to invade planets. 8 capacity is crazy. It's quite a lot. And it's a very, very, very valuable ability. The flip side of it is the Spec Ops 2 upgrades to a combat of 6, which is the best combat value for a ground force you can get. The only other faction that can match you is the Sardak Nor, if they upgrade their infantry. And to make matters worse, Spec Ops 2 has the ability to, just like a normal infantry 2, you can basically roll a die when they die and they go back home. But in Spec Ops 2's case, even that gets increased by 1. So you now have a 60% chance of your infantry just going back home to further defend your home system when they die out in the field, which is a big deal.
They are a 4 commodity race, which is fantastic for their potential to trade. I would say of all the 4 commodity factions, though, they might be the least traded with. We will get more into that when we talk about trade in particular. I feel like of all their advantages, the 4 commodity one is the one that I feel personally the least, but it is there, and a lot of players make a great deal of use out of the fact that they are a 4 commodity faction.
The biggest thing is you should try to use it, but basically don't be surprised when it doesn't work.
Right. Soul does not have a reputation of being a particularly tradey faction, but they do have, essentially the second best situation you can have for commodities.
Right.
Their flagship is really interesting. It is called the Genesis. If you remember our awesome flagship tournament, it did quite well in that. It's called the Genesis, and its ability is at the end of the status phase, place 1 infantry from your reinforcements in this system's space area. So that's cool. Frequently, people forget about that ability.
Right.
It is kind of similar to the Arborek ability in that, you just forget. It has sustained damage like all the other flagships. It hits 2 on a 5 with a movement of 1. And here's the kicker, capacity 12.
Yeah, it's funny because in TI3, which I'm not trying to talk about TI3 very often, but in TI3, the Genesis had infinite capacity. That was its thing. Just infinite. And it's fun to think that in TI4 terms, infinite is 12, and it definitely feels that way. If you have if you have the Genesis out on the board, it's very rare that you fill it up all the way. If you get the Genesis and 1 carrier, especially advanced carrier 2, that's 20 capacity.
Yeah.
That is unreal, and even more so, it's to say that that's actually kind of what we've called in the past win more. It's a bit much. The Genesis is great. It's really great to have, but in most cases, you don't actually need it. You're going to do just fine without spending the $8 on that. Your $8 can go towards way more other stuff that will help you more.
It's actually kind of a shame that it's so good because they are already so good at capacity, like we were mentioning with their advanced carriers, that I feel oftentimes I don't have a very solid reason to build it and use it. If the Genesis was like a flagship for another faction, though, it would be like, oh my God, you have to build the Genesis.
Yeah.
But the fact that you're already so good at capacity makes it kind of difficult to make a case for it sometimes. Let's talk about their Promissory now.
Yeah,
This
is the last thing. It's called military support.
It's called military support, and it reads, at the start of the Soul player's turn, remove 1 token from the Soul player's strategy pool, if able, and return it to his reinforcements. Then you may place 2 infantry from your reinforcements on any planet you control, then return this card to the Soul player. So, if able is the important term there, meaning that Soul can sell this after they have spent all of their strategy tokens, and it essentially costs them nothing and just gives people the orbital drop ability.
This is something in our first guide that we got dead wrong. Basically, in our initial Soul guide, we kind of said, yeah, this is cool, but people aren't probably going to get it that much. But the fact of the matter is, I mean, even if you can sell it for 1 trade good, that's probably a good deal. 1 trade good for someone else to get 2 infantry is not a bad shake, and if you can get more out of it, that's kind of amazing.
Well, and oftentimes you can get more because it does feel like a pretty valuable promissory note once you start peddling it out there. And also, it's very much in vogue to sell this a lot. Right now with the TTS community, it seems like people are pulling that move all the time, and to sometimes a ridiculous extent.
Well, the biggest thing to look at, too, is we talked about 2C4I. Look for any faction that does not have 4 infantry. If they only have 2 infantry, you just found a target to sell military support for like a decent amount.
Right. So overall, I just want to say that Soul feels like a very cleanly, like well-designed faction in that they have all of these abilities that kind of all play off of each other in a really nice, like very, very cool way. Federation of Soul is very tightly designed, and in that way, it's a very good faction for new players because I feel like pretty much anyone can pick up Soul, look at the abilities, and kind of work out like, oh, these kind of all go together in like a very neat way. I've got orbital drop, I've got good capacity to carry my soldiers, my dudes. I get a lot of dudes, and they're good at what they do. It's perfect. They're like one of the most tightly designed factions that we have in Twilight Imperium.
And that is part of the problem that we're going to run into, that we're going to cover throughout the day, is they're so tight and they're so good that the meta has shifted so much against them that from the get-go, people will be working against you. Now, if you're brand new to TI, that might not be the case. Maybe you grab Soul, you're going to maybe find some very, very easy victories with them. And then as soon as your group becomes accustomed to Soul, that's going to start becoming way more difficult because people are going to put an excess amount of pressure on you. And that's going to be a lot of what our guide talks about today, is how do you deal with that pressure that comes with being one of the best factions in the game.
Right. I do want to say something for experienced players before we're just about to get into the early game part of the guide.
Yeah.
But what I want to say is that we are not straying too far from the formula that is traditional for a Soul player. I realize that might disappoint a segment of the audience, especially experienced players. What we ended up deciding to do was to try and outline the formula in as specific detail as possible.
Yep.
And that I feel like if you follow these rules and these points, you're going to have a shot, a very solid shot. I feel like if you try and stray from the traditional formula with Soul, we never found something that felt as solid as what people normally do. And for new players, I'll say this: what we're about to tell you, experienced players are going to see this coming a mile away.
Yes, yeah.
And so that means like you need to execute this pretty tightly and keep your eyes on other people because they know what you're doing when you start to do this.
Right. Yeah, if anything, the biggest flaw of Federation of Soul is their game plan is so obvious and narrow that it makes it very easy for other players to find ways to get in the way of it. Yeah. So that's what you're going to be up against, is people constantly looking at you going, I need to stop you, and I probably can kind of find something that gets the work done.
With that being said, though, this is our guide for how to execute this plan as cleanly and as as delicately as possible in order to avoid that from happening, in order to avoid someone stopping you from executing what is kind of the most obvious Twilight Imperium plan ever.
Yep.
So here we go. Let's talk about the early game.
Let's start with what our goal is in the early game, and then we're going to talk about strategy cards. But the whole point of our early game is to do a few things. The biggest thing is what we're really doing in round 1 is just setting up for round 2. Our entire round 1 is focused on making sure our round 2 is exactly what we want it to be. With some factions, you're just setting up round 1 so that you have a good little framework. With Federation of Soul, you have a very active goal, and that is round 2, you want to take Mechatol Rex, and you want to be the very first person to take it, which means you want to get that Custodian's token. That is your absolute most important goal. So everything in these first 2 rounds is working towards that.
Yeah. And why, Matt, do you want the Custodian's token so much? Why does that matter so much?
It is a free point. I mean, I say free. It costs 6 influence, right? But the biggest thing is when you think about points, there's an availability of points. You have 5 public objectives. You can get 3 secret objectives, and then there's stage 2s. The stage 2 objectives are pretty difficult. Getting all 3 of your secret objectives can be kind of tricky. Soul is very good at almost every single stage 1 public objective.
Right.
So the big thing is, if you are able to get the Custodian point, that is 1 point that nobody else can get, and it makes your total of points that you need to acquire 1 less than everybody else. And when I say total points, what I mean is total points through objectives. Everybody else in the game has to score 10 points worth of objectives. You have to score 9 points worth of objectives if you get that Custodian point. And every time you take Imperial while sitting on Mechatol Rex, that's 1 less point you have to find elsewhere. That's 1 less point that someone else can see coming. Oh, he wants to get 4 planets of a certain trait. We can block him by taking this trait. You can avoid all of the scenarios by getting what we keep calling free points. Custodians and Imperial are free points that avoid the issue of trying to find 10 points elsewhere.
All right. Well, how do we get to Mechatol Rex before anybody else? How do we manage that?
Here's your biggest advantage as Soul. You start with Anti-Mass Deflectors, which is a single blue tech, which means you are only 1 away from Gravity Drive. Gravity Drive lets you make ships move faster, and that's how we get to Mechatol Rex fast. We need to be fast. So our number 1 goal in round 1 is to get Gravity Drive.
So we obviously have to do tech. We have to do either the secondary of tech or the primary of tech. What do we do? So that's 4. We basically already spent 4 monies.
Yes.
What do we do if we have any extra money?
Extra money is useful. We don't want to count on it. There's only one situation where we can rely on having extra money, but in general, if we have extra money, there's kind of a specific plan that I think is important to adhere to, which is we're going to build ships because a big part of playing Soul is defending your stuff.
Yes.
People are going to be looking at you. They want to attack you. So it's time to always be hunkering down. So with extra money, the end goal is to build 1 carrier, 1 destroyer, 2 ground forces, and 2 fighters. That's 6 production capacity. That's the maximum of what you would be allowed to build in your home system, and that costs $6. Now, if you end up getting less than $6, it's okay. Knock off the destroyer, and then maybe knock off the fighters, or maybe knock off the ground. I don't know. It depends on what you want to do, but that carrier is kind of the most important part. So the $3 is really nice, and then anything outside of that you add to the list. So all of that is not something we'll necessarily use this round, but we want it in the pocket so that we have a safer round 2 to build stuff. But again, this is not something you can always rely on depending on what strategy card you ended up taking.
Right. The other thing that we want to mention is that the military support trick that we talked about in the overview of, hey, I've spent all of my strategy tokens. I can now sell my military support, get stuff, and basically lose nothing. This is the time really for that play, is round 1 and round 2. It's good to do it early. It also is good because it kind of helps you get on people's good graces, which you will need to because you are going to, in the mid-game, probably worry a lot of people.
Yeah.
If all of this goes well for you, if you execute this correctly, by like round 3 or 4, everybody's going to be talking about you, and it will probably be helpful to kind of start working above the table very early, so that at least once we get to the mid game, maybe there's a little bit of trepidation of like, hey, well, I don't know. I mean, I've traded a lot with him, and it seems like we can keep trading, so maybe I want to keep trading with him. Stuff like that.
Or more importantly, you just won't get the opportunity to later. People will stop trading with you outright. So if you can get the trades done now, that's when you're going to make your money.
Right. And so now we're going to talk about strategy cards. This is specifically for round 1. And the way we're going to talk about strategy cards in a lot of these new guides is we're basically just going to work through what you would do with basically each of them. We're going to exclude diplomacy and imperial because we could not think of a very good reason to take either with Soul.
Right.
There might be a faction where we come up with a good reason. Extra, I'm kind of looking at you. For Matt, I guess, not for me. But for Soul, we're just going to kind of go down the list and basically talk about, all right, if you end up with this strategy card, what do we think you should do with it?
Yeah, this is a little bit of a reaction to a flaw we found in our early strategy guides. So if you're a longtime fan of the show, you'll know we said, like, here's what we think you should take most importantly. But that doesn't work because there's just so little control you have over that. So we want to make the case for every single strategy card so that you can look at that and go, okay, which approach do I want to take given my options? You need to know what you can do with every single possible strategy card. So let's start with leadership. Leadership is first up. If you were to end up with leadership, good news, you have lots and lots and lots of options because you're going to get 3 free command counters, which means you have lots of stalling potential. When we talk about stalling, you're like one of the better stalling factions out there. Obviously, Asarl is like born to stall, but in early game, you are better at stalling than Asarl because every command counter in your strategy pool is an orbital drop that you get to gain 2 infantry and also stall out other things. Now, when we talk about stalling, it's usually for specific purposes of like when you want to either get tech or you want to prevent other people from using the warfare ability that you're going to use. But in this case, that's the main thing is it's maybe helping us find an opportunity to get tech and in general, just the ability to do lots of stuff. So with leadership, you're going to do your typical expansion, and a typical expansion for Soul is 1 carrier goes adjacent to your home system where you probably have at least 1 system. And your second carrier is waiting until you can research gravity drive off of the secondary of technology.
Yep.
And once it has gravity drive, now it has 2 movement. You want to go park that next to Mechatol Rex. Now, sometimes you do not have a planet next to Mechatol Rex. Your alternative is to park it adjacent to your home system on the path to Mechatol Rex so that next round it can use its 2 movement to get to Mechatol Rex. But you need it to be 2 spaces away. There's a few other alternatives too. You could send it to an equidistant planet, which is the system that you kind of share proximity with your neighbor. You could go to your equidistant and then the next round go from the equidistant to Mechatol. But as long as you are 2 spaces away, you're in the clear.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to recommend that you do the secondary of politics too, just to get, because you have the extra CC for it.
Right.
There's no reason not to get ahead on action cards.
Action cards never hurt. Sometimes I've run into an issue. This does not apply to round 1, but in general, because you start with Neural Motivator, you're definitely drawing 2 action cards every status phase. And when you do politics, you're getting 2 more. That's 4 per round. You have a hand limit of 7. Now, there are lots that will argue it doesn't matter. Keep drawing as many action cards as you can, and it's okay if you discard bad ones. You're still keeping the best 7. The more you can cycle through action cards, the better. That is obviously to a limit. If your hand is absolutely killer and you want to keep all of it, you don't need to do politics. But this applies later. Round 1, it's great to get that early lead on politics and having action cards ready to go.
Yeah, I'm going to argue that in this case, if you take leadership, that I would maybe go ahead and do it because your Soul... it's going to be a rough road. Like there's going to be people that try and ruin your day in the next couple rounds, and getting ahead on the action card draw is not the worst thing that you could do in the world.
With leadership, I also want you to make a point to see if you can get in on trading.
Yeah.
There's going to be plenty of games where this is not an option. But if one of your neighbors is the person who picked trade, you have a destroyer. That destroyer can move 2, which means it's very likely that that destroyer can go park adjacent to someone else's systems that you can trade with. And this will establish your trading relationship. And if you can get a good amount of money out of trade, then it's a good idea to also save one of those 3 new command counters for the secondary of warfare. It's always great to get some units out round 1 just because it's more defenses, but you don't want to go crazy with this. If you only end up getting $1, none of this was worth it. But if you can get like $4, you have 4 commodities. Let's say someone like the Ghosts of Creus take trade. They also have 4 commodities. It's entirely plausible that you or them could send destroyers towards each other, do a 4 commodity for 4 commodity swap, gain $4. You've got a pretty good warfare option, and it is worth spending the command counter to do that warfare.
I agree. One note I want to say for this leadership play we've described, if you make sure as you're doing orbital drop that you kind of have a plan for those dudes. If you orbital drop too much and realize like, wait, now I've just got a bunch of dudes in my home system and I'm way out of capacity, that's not good.
Right.
You should in general have a plan to get those dudes out there on planets, specifically Mechatol Rex, but also other planets as well. Just I've noticed sometimes if people overemphasize orbital drop in the early game, sometimes they end up leaving like way too many dudes on like one random planet because they just ran out of capacity.
The biggest thing for me is I always want to orbital drop at least once, if I can help it.
For sure.
And I want to orbital drop underneath the carrier that I intend to send to Mechatol Rex.
Yes.
The point there being is I would love to send 2 infantry to Mechatol Rex, and you probably sent 2 infantry with that carrier initially. The last thing you want to do is leave 2 planets empty.
Yes.
So what you do is you drop 2 infantry behind, then you take those 2 infantry that you orbital dropped with you to Mechatol Rex, leaving 1 and 1 on either planet that you are abandoning.
Yeah, completely agree. Are we ready to talk about the next strategy card?
Leadership is the most complicated one because you are given the opportunity to do so many actions. So let's talk about politics.
Right.
The first I
want to say at the beginning, politics is my favorite round 1 draw for Soul because it seems the most reliable. But let's just get into it.
Yeah. The very first thing, and this is sort of above the table, is when you draw politics, you need to look at the warfare player. Looking at the warfare player, what you're looking for is what is their starting tech, or more importantly, just in general, are they going to start going for Mechatol Rex themselves? The player who takes warfare round 1 has the option to expand adjacent to their home system, pull the warfare token, and then expand adjacent to Mechatol Rex, which means that next round they have the option to take Mechatol Rex. They will be close enough, even with a 1 movement carrier. Mm-hmm. Because you have politics, you are going to get the speaker token. You have control over what you do next round, but you need to see how much stuff that warfare player looks like they might be planning to bring to Mechatol Rex. Because for some people, it's very little, and they're not going to bother taking Mechatol Rex. But for others, they might be taking their whole fleet and moving it closer and closer to Mechatol Rex, so that even if you take it first, they might jump on you and take everything you've got on Mechatol Rex. And that needs to inform your strategy of how you go about approaching taking Mechatol Rex.
Yeah, I agree. I think Arborek is good to shout out for that. If you've got an Arborek with Warfare looking to make a play for Mechatol Rex, I think in that situation, maybe not doing what Matt just said to do, taking 4 infantry to Mechatol Rex might be the smart play. In situations like that, you're probably gonna have to just count on, all right, well, whatever I have over Mechatol is gonna die. So that carrier might be just going solo with no fighter, with the intention of like, well, there's no shot there, but the idea is to hold Mechatol Rex underneath whatever. I guess SAR is probably who we're really thinking about.
Yeah, the SAR is your biggest threat, but there's a few others, and in general, just anyone with warfare can potentially be a threat. So it's at least worth looking at what they're doing.
Right. And what I like about this is politics into round 2 leadership. The only person that can technically beat you is Nalu. But besides that, no one can get there before you if you take politics.
Right. So your next things for this round are pretty basic. Expand. Again, try to expand towards Mechatol Rex. Be prepared to take it next round. You definitely need to save your $4 in your home planet and a strategy token for doing the secondary of tech. Your other strategy counter is probably just to orbital drop the fleet or the people that are prepared to go take Mechatol. And the biggest thing is your plan is almost definitely to take leadership round 2. Do not sell the speaker token unless the player to your right definitely has absolutely no intention of taking Mechatol Rex.
Right.
But even then, I don't love doing it because if they take leadership, that means I have to take Diplo, and that's not nearly as good of a position.
Right.
It's certainly in your favor to just keep the speaker token. They would have to offer you quite a lot for it to be worth it. If it was Jolnar offering me research agreement and they were going to research hypermetabolism, that might be like a scenario where I decide to sell the speaker token.
Sure.
But outside of something very, very valuable like that, keep the speaker token for yourself so that you can secure Mechatol Rex round 2.
Right. And it's worth noting, well, actually, I don't even know how much it's worth noting, because if you're playing with people worth their salt, you're not going to be able to grab Imperial round 2 and make some sort of custodians into Imperial play.
Right.
But if for some reason you're playing with a bunch of people and just they don't care about Mechatol, nobody's eyeing it, you feel really confident and you want to be, you want to kind of gamble a little bit, you could politics into round 2 leadership. And if you're still confident you're going to get that Custodians token, then that's going to be an awesome start for you.
Yeah.
I mean,
you said leadership. You meant Imperial. You can get Imperial round 2 to score 2 points for free, basically.
Right. Now, in that situation, it's really hard to imagine that the table isn't going to just gut you off of that. But I think it's worth noting that that is going to be your option if you take politics round 1. And that's why I love round 1 politics for Salt.
Something we haven't talked about yet that is important and probably should have been stated beforehand is obviously the Custodian's point costs 6 influence. So you need to be planning for that in all of this. That second carrier that goes somewhere, ideally it goes to wherever has the most influence. In some games, maybe you don't move out at all until you have gravity drive for both carriers, and then your first carrier goes to whatever system gets you the most influence, because you only have 2 influence in your home system. Alternatively, if you get trade goods, there's an argument to saving up the trade goods for Mechatol Rex, but I felt like it's important to point that out of don't just gun for Mechatol Rex, and make sure you have 6 influence in the pocket.
Yeah, you're going to have 6 influence. I would, in a situation where that sounds kind of dire, you got to push your military support. People want it. People are going to want it. Just make sure you're selling it to them.
Yep, that's the biggest importance of selling it round 1 is just to net that extra money that you might be able to use on Mechatol.
If there's a Jolnar is a really good target for military support. Pretty much anybody is a good target, but Jolnar is like probably my favorite.
Yeah.
Let's talk about construction.
Construction is the weirdest one. The main reason you probably got construction is because you picked last. Yeah. I've heard people make arguments that construction is very good for Soul, and they're not totally wrong, but everything else still feels like a better choice than construction, even if construction isn't that bad. But with construction, it's the same expansion plan. You're definitely orbital dropping once, but you're saving 1 command token for tech. The biggest thing is you want to construct that PDS or Space Dock or 2 PDS. It should be on the path to Mechatol Rex. There's not really any value in constructing on either of your wings, right? To the left or to the right of your home system. Neither of those positions help you in your quest.
Yeah. I kind of favor the forward dock, I think, for Soul versus the double PDS.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a toss-up. You're not the most like space dock dependent faction, I feel. Although you are going to be building a lot of fighters later, so maybe I might go ahead and take that back. I might go ahead and errata myself. But it does feel like a construction round 1 pick into forward dock. It's not even going to be your favorite, like it's probably not even going to be your favorite planet. You know what I mean? You're not going to have a full, like if there's a really juicy planet right next to Mechatol, obviously we would like to have that forward dock there. You might not even get access to that though, because you get to expand and then orbital drop, and then if they're stalling out tech, that's basically all you got. There's no other.
Right, you have no other stalls. The 2 PDS is my play mostly if the resources in my slice are low. Space docks are only as good as the planets they're put on.
For
right?
sure.
Your production is 2 plus the resource value of that planet. So if you just have a really high influence slice and really low resources, the space dock's not as important, and the PDS is going to help defend you later. And defense is everything with Federation of Sol. So it really comes down to what do you think is going to help that defense more? A really good space dock can be great for defense because that's pumping out a ton of fighters, but a really bad space dock is not any better than a PDS.
I'll say this, another reason that I'm not crazy about a round 1 construction pick is that I feel like I'm going to pretty reliably in Soul games make a mid-game construction pick myself.
Yep. Oh, definitely.
To try and get some PDS on some choice planets to make sure that people cannot bombard me off of... Because, I mean, Planetary Shield combined with Spec Ops 2 or even Spec Ops 1 is a pretty potent combination.
Yeah, your biggest thing is you are eventually going to want a PDS on Mechatol, and you can't do that round 1. So all the PDS you put down right now are just like, it's fun and fine, and it's great.
Right.
But it's
right.
not.
And
it's
hopefully
not
it'll
critical.
be useful, but it's not critical. Yeah.
Yeah.
We ready to talk about trade?
Super ready to talk about trade. You lead us off.
All right. So if we take trade, I don't hate trade, but it's weird. Soul is a 4 commodity faction, but people generally are going to try and keep you in check if they know what's going on. So you might make yourself seem really scary with a round 1 trade, but essentially the idea is we're going to expand like normal. I mean, I can't imagine why we wouldn't expand. What we would like to do is court a buddy to come towards you. You always want to, if you have the trade card, you always want someone to come to you to send their destroyer or cruiser towards your stuff. And then the minimum amount of money we want to make off trade is $7. That's the $3 we're going to get off trade, and then the $4 you're going to get off of your 1-for-1 commodity trades. But with our promissory note, I believe you should be able to get above 7.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. And the fact that you're going to create a trade partner so early, this is getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but you should be looking for, I think, an early support for the throne swap. That's something that you should kind of have on your mind as a possibility for Soul.
Right. So what you're doing round 1 is just finding a best friend in general, someone that you will be able to make that proposal to later.
Right. Anyways, as far as secondary goes, this is one where we're going to want a secondary tech, obviously, and secondary warfare. Because we have those extra dollars, it is worth it to go ahead and get some more plastic on the table. What I don't like about this one is there's no orbital drop, which means likely we are taking two boys to Mechatol, which is not... 2 boys and then leaving some empty planets. That's essentially what makes it a little bit shady. You could take 3 boys if you took 3 of your boys off of the home system and then leave your home system empty, and then your secondary warfare, hopefully you'll be building some more boys.
Right. You can take 1 later.
Yeah. But it feels a little bit thin on the boys' side because you're not doing any orbital drop, but we are going to get more plastic in general. So it all depends.
Trade secures your home slice more than it secures Mechatol.
Yes.
That's just your threat, and that's what you need to be prepared for. But hopefully you've made friends that aren't that worried about your Mechatol take.
Mm-hmm. This is one I could feel that some players like really favor taking trade early with Soul. I mean, there's definitely a crowd out there that basically just says round 1 you should take trade every single time no matter what.
For sure.
And I could even see the argument for that here with Soul. I just get a little scared of not having any orbital drop first and having those new dudes that we made stuck back at the home system. Feels a little slow.
Yeah. Let's talk about warfare.
Yeah. This is
Warfare is the weirdest one because warfare is the one situation where we don't technically need gravity drive.
Right.
I think we still want it, but it is not necessary. So we kind of have to like really plan out some stuff. With warfare, you're going to have the opportunity to take 3 systems in your slice,
right?
Because you'll be able to move 2 carriers, and one of those carriers will get to move again. I think that's the way you should go. Some people might see value in you building in your home system to get more stuff and then unactivating that and then moving more things out and not ending up next to it. But I don't know. I'm a little bit nervous of building out of my home system off of warfare when I could spend that $4 on the tech and still be it's set up well for next round, and more importantly, just set up well for the possibility of future objectives and all of those things. Getting one tech around is generally useful and good. And if you have the 4 resources, it's not a bad idea. But in general, you want to get the 3 systems in your slice. Ideally, 2 of them are on the path to Mechatol. And at one point, one of the carriers will split off and double back towards either direction of your home system, if that makes any sense.
One thing that you're very good at with Warfare is you're a pretty solid Warfare stall. Like we said earlier, you're kind of a little bit better than Isarl at stalling at the very beginning.
Right.
Depending on if Isarl takes the secondary of politics, you might basically be the best stall we've got, essentially.
Yeah. And so what you're able to do is Warfare, but before, like, you move out once, you move out again, you move out your destroyer to go make a trade buddy, you orbital drop. That's 4 things. That's 4 things you get to do before tech ever gets popped. That's a lot. And in addition, that's 4 things other people have to find to do before they can get not a free, but they get to get a carrier in their home system that they can move out. Factions that only start with 1 carrier are like typically very desperate for Warfare round 1 to time out in a way where they can still take 2 systems. It's your goal, if you took Warfare, to hinder that as much as possible. You have so many things you can do before you do Warfare. Unless you're getting paid lots of money to activate Warfare beforehand, I would stall it every single time.
Right. Another thing that's notable about taking Warfare is that you could research tech and just research Daxiv or Fighter 2 instead. Those are kind of the 2 options we've selected as being most potent. I think personally Fighter 2, I think there's a world for Fighter 2 round 1 with Soul. However, I think the utility of that is I need to score the 2 adjacent to Mechatol public objective, or I am eyeing somebody that is going to make a play for Mechatol, and I need this fighter to gum up the works, basically, to just get in the way to stop them. Now, it'd be really cool if you're in a situation where those are both the same thing, where scoring that objective and gumming up the works, it's all accomplished. But I would say that taking Mechatol in the second round is critical enough to be worth a early fighter just in the way. Because essentially Soul's strength is in getting to Mechatol before somebody else and then holding it. It is not, hey, somebody else took it, now I can take it from them. They're not like that. They're not uprooters. You know what I mean?
Right.
To use our old Barony of Letnev term.
Right.
They are not really like that at all.
You're just a rooter. Your goal is to get places first and hold it forever.
You're just a rooter. You're like a very streamlined, sexy Arborec. That's what you are, basically.
Yeah.
And then the last strategy card for us to talk about is technology. Technology is, I think, a very good pick for Soul. It's pretty much always a good pick for everybody.
It's probably the safest explicitly for round 1. You talked about politics being good for both, but tech is the way to guarantee you will do what you want to do round 1.
Right. Well, so in general, it's good with tech to actually like take a look at your opponents and see if you can keep them from teching. Very similar to Warfare Stall. Just take a look at the factions. Do they have the money to tech? If they don't, maybe that's a potential trade partner for you. Maybe that's somebody that you can trade military support for, or even do an early support swap with, basically.
Yeah.
Always try and use that leverage in a, not a mean, like, extorty way, but kind of a like, hey, I've got this. What's something you can do to help me? Especially because we are playing a faction that has a lot of nasty meta. So let's try and be the nice guy.
Yeah. Let's talk about the other thing, your option as when you have tech. It's always the option you have, which is that you could buy 2 tech.
Right.
Obviously, you couldn't buy 2 tech if you activate a tech right away. But if you can find $2, you can do 2 tech. Is that worth it round 1? The biggest thing is you would have to find your trade buddy, and you would have to net $2 off of them. And that could be really tricky to do. But you might be able to leverage tech as part of that, right? You can say, I will stall tech if you trade with me and we can make money off of it, etc.
Right. And they would rather, whoever has the trade card would much rather actually trade with someone than just flip trade first thing.
Especially someone who has 4 commodities.
Yeah.
This is a situation where you do a 4 for 3 or something.
Yeah,
you give up 4, you only gain 3. That's fine. You need 2. But is it even then still a good idea? I'm going to say most cases, no.
Yeah.
But if
it's kind of a win more.
It is a win more. You don't need it right away. Those $2 could be saved for Mechatol Rex or could be spent in addition. If you got more than $2, you're probably better off building units. But if one of the first 2 public objectives is 2 tech in 2 colors, there's maybe an argument for it.
Right.
In general, the tech objectives are things where it's like it's nice to bank those and then be able to score them later. So there's not really a reason to need to score it round 1 right away. But to be able to get it out of the way very quickly and still be going down all of your tech paths does have some use to it. Right. So at the very least, if you double tech, your plan is now to double orbital drop as well, because that's how you're going to defend your slice, because you're not building any units. But if you don't double tech, I would find a point to do the secondary of warfare when I have technology, because I'm getting 1 tech for free, which means I have $4 already freed up. So there's no point in trying to get that. You know, if I got those $2, I could even still have $6 to build the big nice fleet we talked about earlier. 1 carrier, 1 destroyer, 2 fighters, 2 ground forces. That's a great route to go down. It only costs you 1 command counter. You can still orbital drop once. To me, that's a better build, even if you're able to get extra money when you have tech.
Right. Yeah. I think this does hold true, that if you are holding the tech card and your soul, that you should pretty reliably be able to do some trades with people. You have a lot of leverage at the table holding tech. Yeah. You have 4 commodities. Make yourself a little bit of money. Make it work. And I do agree with Matt that I think it's more worth it to probably do warfare secondary plus 1 orbital drop versus teching 2 colors. It just seems like too much too quickly. You've got a great start when it comes to tech. You don't need to just kind of like double down and like it's you know, you're not Joel Nar. You're not just gunning for. You're trying to be good at a lot of things. Pretty solid at a lot of things, not just be very good at tech. Do we want to move? And we're not going to do Imperial. Yeah, we are already almost at the hour mark, and we are just getting to round 2. What is this, a live game? What is this, like a hypothetical live game that we're playing? Round 2. Let's do it now. You got to take Mechatol Rex. That's got to be what you do.
Everything's been working to this moment.
Mm-hmm. And if someone... See, here's the thing. This is where it's going to get really weird. What do you do if somebody gets there first? Well... If you can take it from them, we're going to say you should. You're not going to get the Custodian's token, but we would rather go into the mid-game with the point leverage of having Mechatol Rex than not having it.
Yes. Some of the threats there are, if Clan Asar takes Mechatol Rex, you're probably done. That's probably it.
Sorry, buddy.
You may never get it. You might stick around. They may go somewhere else. But for now, give it up. Barony is a little bit of a threat. If they were the ones that had like warfare, they can bring a lot of scary stuff. It can be tricky. Your other options are Hakan and Ghosts. Typically can beat you there, and they're not hard to deal with. Generally, speaking.
A lot of times
they usually
if it's
don't have
Ghost
enough.
or Hakan that beat you there, then you are going to be able to get more plastic there in order to beat them. Yeah.
Those are the factions that all also have the ability to get gravity drive fast. That's why they can beat you there. Obviously, like we said, anybody with warfare could potentially beat you there. So it's just a matter of kind of counting the odds on whether or not your carrier, maybe 1 or 2 fighters, and some ground forces are going to be able to take Mechatol from them. A lot of people really just want the custodian point, so they will send 1 carrier and 1 infantry just to take it so that you can't. A lot of people go to Mechatol without the intent of sticking around. So if they're doing that, that's fine. Take them off and go supplant yourself, because you are better served being there.
I honestly don't mind too bad when people do that, because it means I get to destroy one of their carriers early game, which is actually kind of silly that they just sacrifice that carrier so flippantly. And then the other thing I get to do is have Mechatol, but without having a lot of early game heat. So I
Yep.
still have that option of like, all right, we could do a swing round in the mid to late game, but right now people like, yeah, Soul's got Mechatol, but they didn't get the point, so they're kind of
Right.
just there. And then nobody's really going to be that scared of you until you have an opportunity to take Imperial.
Right.
But anyways, we kind of have to make our argument now as to why are we emphasizing Mechatol Rex so much?
Right.
We have kind of already put it out there, but it feels like we really need to drive this home because me and Matt basically have been playing game after game of Soul, and we've been trying to deviate from kind of our original strategy guide, and we never really found the alternate path that felt really, really solid compared to this path. Because what do you get if you have Mechatol?
You get a lot, it turns out, and it's so the biggest argument that we've making so far is you have the potential for free points. Well, there's an easy counter argument there. The board can keep you getting from Imperial, so you'll never get the stuff. But there's a way, way, way more important reason to why you want Mechatol Rex, and it has to do with the 6 influence, which means every time leadership pops, that's 2 additional command counters that you get very, very easily.
Right.
And in addition to the 1 command counter you get per round, you are now taking 3 extra actions every single round.
Right.
3 additional command counters per round is nothing to scoff at. That could be, you could put all of that into orbital drop. That's 6 additional infantry every single round. Or you can just go and do more stuff. You can activate more systems, take more planets, get more planets with traits. It helps you score objectives better. The games that I have when I'm really low on command counters, those are the ones where you never felt like you had a chance because you could only do like 1 or 2 activations per round. And how could you ever find the way to get the points? A Soul on Mechatol, sure, they're a threat. People are scared of you, but you are doing so much ahead of them that they have a trouble catching up to you. You're activating more stuff, you're moving more stuff around, you're doing more orbital drops. You are just better defended in every way with those 2 additional command counters.
Right. And also the most common way that people will block you from getting your Mechatol Rex point is to take Imperial before you take it. And honestly, that situation is a very good situation to be in because our goal with taking Mechatol Rex with Soul is to not really have to score any of the stage 2 objectives. So every time somebody else takes Imperial, you're getting another shot to draw a new secret objective that might be one that you can actually accomplish. Our goal is to get 3 secret objectives in our hand that we could feasibly do, which is a lot of them. Soul is pretty effective at most every objective. It's pretty obvious the ones that they can't do easily. A lot of the like control 4 of a specific type. Obviously, if they don't have access to those planets really easily, those are really hard. But most of the others, pretty even 4 tech in 1 color is not the worst draw for Soul. So the idea is to cycle through secret objectives until we can get 3 that we can score. We focus on scoring those easy stage 1 public objectives, and all we got to do is get 1 or 2 extra points, and then we are going to win this game without having to score a single stage 2.
Right.
And we can do it quickly. That's the idea.
Yeah, the most interesting part of that whole dynamic is the fact that if you don't take Mechatol Rex and someone else just kind of piddly takes it, which seems to be the thing that happens. Someone else, if some other faction takes Mechatol, I think more than half the time it's someone that doesn't care that much about being there. They just wanted the custodian's point, and then they just sit there and they hang out for a while, and nobody else cares enough to take it from them because they don't see the value in taking Mechatol. This happens all the time, and what happens when people are sitting there like that is nobody cares about taking Imperial, which means the only way you're going to get secret objectives is taking it yourself. And that's just like a little bit rougher and more annoying. It is great when you're on Mechatol, which means someone's definitely taking Imperial every round. If it's not you, that's great. You're going to draw secret objectives. If it is you, that's great. You're going to score a point.
Right. And I would say we're still talking about the early game here. We're almost done, but our goal is not to jump on Mechatol Rex and instantly look really scary by taking Imperial. That is not the goal here.
Right.
You want to be Imperial blocked. That is the goal, is to get people to block you by taking Imperial themselves. So you kind of need that to happen. What are some of the potential problems of this early game plan? Well, the really obvious one is that you did not get Mechatol Rex. What do we do if we cannot get Mechatol Rex in the early game?
It's a tricky situation, and there's honestly a billion different ways you can come at it. I think our favorite is the plan for time to work up to getting fleet logistics and making an Imperial play later. Fleet logistics is a tech that you will now only be one away because you already have gravity drive and anti-mass, and it will allow you to take 2 actions back to back, which means if you prep properly, if you wait to take politics, you get politics. Next round, you get Imperial. You build up a good fleet. The person who's been parked there has X amount of ships. You build up a fleet that is enough to take Mechatol. Then on your turn, you successfully take Mechatol, immediately use fleet logistics to pop Imperial, get the point. It's almost as if you took the Custodian's token.
Right. I would say in general, fleet logistics is oh no, things are not going well. Now it's time to aggressively take and orbital drop off the back of it. So even if you're not going this Imperial path, fleet logistics is kind of the secret weapon, I feel like, for Federation of Sol.
Yeah,
they
are
are
really cool.
Right.
The fact that you can take any system and immediately use fleet logistics to drop 2 more infantry there, as long as you've got the command counters. That's a crazy powerful ability, let alone just the fact that you can do 2 actions in general. The fact that one of the actions at Sol's disposal is this ability to reinforce something it just took means you can make really aggressive plays when you want to.
Now, so not to get too much into going down a completely alternate path, but I just want to throw out options if things are going bad. And also just to show everybody listening to this that we are not just we're not like zealots about this one specific way to play Sol. If Mechatol Rex is just not on the table, there's not even there's no point in even building a fleet to try and sneak in there. It's just not going to happen. What you need, I think at that point, is influence or trade goods. It's time to grab trade and make myself everybody's buddy. Get military support out there, get as many trade goods as possible so that I can continue to use orbital drop to get to get at least like three dudes, I would say, on most planets that I need to defend, and take planets that are high influence, basically.
And you have a leg to stand on here. The meta of what people know about Sol is that Sol on Mechatol is a big problem. If you're not on Mechatol, sell that idea to the table. I'm not a big threat anymore. I'm just here. I'm just here in my own slice. If you go expand to some equidistance, great, whatever. But you got to start really selling the idea that you are definitely not the biggest threat here. It's hard to do. Sometimes people won't listen to you because they're still just well, you're Sol. You can always find a way. And they're not wrong. So it's just important to always leave yourself open to different interpretations with each individual player. Do whatever you can to make good graces.
Right. Let's talk now. We have this next section. We're going to talk about the potential tech path for Federation of Sol. Now, our goal with all of these tech paths is to basically accomplish the really simple, easier tech objectives. We're not going to do 2 and 4 colors, basically. But we are going to try in every single game to get 2 and 2 colors and go ahead and grab 3 upgrades. So that we can accomplish the 2 upgrades stage 1, the 3 upgrades stage 2, which I think is everyone agrees is by far the easiest.
Yes.
You also, what's interesting with all of our what's great about Sol is that we can also very easily fold in the both faction tech secret objective into our tech path as well. So these tech paths we're about to give you accomplish a lot of victory points, and I would say that overall, Sol's tech game is just kind of beautiful. It's simple, it's elegant.
Without having any specific actual tech ability advantages, they have the strongest tech game. Jolnar is the only person who can do even more work in the tech world, and it's because that's their whole freaking deal. Necro can get there in the right circumstances, but Sol is practically designed around perfect tech paths. The standard, what we think is just sort of your safest bet, and you can kind of watch everything from all angles, is like we said, gravity drive round 1. Then you're going to get fighter 2, then advanced carrier 2, then go down green into Dax of Animators and Spec Ops 2. The big point here is what we're kind of focusing on with all of the Sol Tech paths is in what order do you get the upgrades? Because that depends on how you feel different people are going to approach you. What Fighter 2 early allows you to do is Maybe throw some gum in the way of other people, but mostly start working on gumming up your own stuff. You are
Right.
going to be a threat to people. The more fighters you can throw into random systems to block people from jumping into your more important systems, the better. And you need to get that started earlier rather than
Right.
later.
Right. One thing that we have very much changed from our original Soul Guide is that Spec Ops 2 feels a lot more like a win more tech and less
Yeah.
of a, oh my God, I need to rush for Spec Ops 2. Essentially, I think Spec Ops 2 only becomes super relevant in the late game where people might actually be able to bring enough of their own ground forces in order to challenge you, or they might be able to cut your ground forces in half with like a good plague card, or perhaps they have a lot of bombardment. This is the time that Spec Ops 2 starts feeling really essential. For most of the early and mid game, it feels like Spec Ops 2 is not something to rush for.
Yeah.
You will still win a lot of fights and outnumber your opponents in most cases when it comes to ground combat.
Yeah. Let's talk about one of my pitfalls. Your other tech path option is what is kind of the aggressive strategy. And it's something that I like, but I don't always have success with because I am too aggressive of a player a lot of times. I jump out there, spread myself too thin, and it ends up hurting me in the long run. But something that can open up options for you if they are available is going Gravity Drive directly into Carrier 2 and then Fighter 2 Dax of Spec Ops 2. Going Carrier 2 first means you have carriers that move 2 +1 with Gravity Drive. If you need to make precision strikes, Carrier 2 is really, really good at that because you have a carrier with 8 capacity. You don't need more units than that, right? Most fleets, Gravity Drive is only useful like if you're going not too far. But with Soul, explicitly, you can send 1 carrier, like 5 fighters and 3 infantry, and in the somewhat early game, probably take any planet you want.
Right.
So if you need early traits or tech specialties or something like that, and you don't think it'll hurt your game too much, that is an option. But just be wary that you are being overly aggressive and you're going to draw even more ire from the table.
Yeah, I'll say this: if you're trying to take Mechatol Rex and take early control objectives, that table is going to try to squash you as much as possible.
Yeah, and they'll probably succeed because that's 5 players all very mad at you.
Right. I think this is a good tech path for all right, well, Mechatol Rex is not going to work out this time. So I might as well get early Carrier 2 to try and be as much of a nuisance and kind of root down on certain planets before other people can.
Yeah,
because like a round 2 Carrier 2, you basically, your capacity game is to such an extent that no one can mess with you.
Yeah, the biggest argument there too is that, and the reason I originally thought Carrier 2 was the best way to go is having 2 additional fighters seemed better than having Fighter 2. I'm sure the math is like, Matt, you're an idiot, but having 2 additional hits to soak seemed useful, and having that sustained damage, that's 3 additional hits you can take in a space combat. So even the +1 advantage seemed better. Someone's gonna math check me on that, and I'm always wrong when it comes to like strict math stuff. But I originally liked Advanced Carrier 2 because it opened up those 2 extra capacity slots. But the problem I always found is it led me down a dark path of stretching myself too thin. I put a carrier somewhere I can't defend.
Right. And that very much just kind of leans into your style as a player. I want to talk about this next path, which is kind of, it's not the best path, and I'm not really. This is the one we almost completely left out, which was essentially Grav Drive, Daxiv, Spec Ops 2, and then Fighter 2 and Carrier 2. But the idea here is, I need to rush for Spec Ops 2. Essentially, it's a called shot of, I got to Mechatol, and I can see this specific fleet is going to come after me, and I think Spec Ops 2 is going to be necessary in order to close the gap. Yeah. Now, that's a wild shot to call, to just be like, I can see exactly how much bombardment and how many infantry they're going to have, and Spec Ops 2 is going to close this gap, but it felt silly to leave it out, so there you go.
It's there. The next one is a little bit more in line with what we were talking about earlier, which is when you get Warfare early, you can kind of lean into this gum idea, which is, well, you don't need Gravity Drive, so what could you do instead? You can get Fighter 2, you go Fighter 2, Gravity Drive, Carrier 2, Daxiv, Spec Ops 2, but the Fighter 2 very, very early lets you maybe block other people from getting in your way of doing Mechatol or just things in general. It's
Right.
having Fighter 2 right out the gate doesn't hurt, and if you don't absolutely need Gravity Drive because you took Warfare, then it's not a bad path to go.
Right.
But outside of those techs that we keep repeating, that's it. Like that is your tech path. It always ends at the same point, right? All those are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tech that you want to buy.
Mm-hmm. It's a pretty simple path too. That's one of the things that I really love about it. It's just like each one of those is fairly useful to very useful.
Yes.
Daxiv obviously being, in my opinion, kind of the stinker in that whole group.
But it's still good. It's still quite good for you.
It's still good.
It's the least good.
Least good. Let's talk about skips. We just want to talk about like, if you have access to these skips, and just kind of talk a little bit about, what kind of game you could play. If you got a yellow skip, Dread 2 is far from the worst thing in the world. It's obviously the most useful and versatile unit upgrade you could possibly get. I don't know that it particularly replaces any of the techs we have on our tech path, but because it is an upgrade, you could still sub it in and accomplish all of the things that we are accomplishing with our tech path.
I almost got Dread 2 in today's game because I hadn't gone down green yet, and we were already getting towards the late game when stage 2s were going to come out, and I was prepared to, at any moment, I had a yellow skip, and it was like, well, if I have to get a third, I don't need to go down green. I can just get that Dreadnought 2 really fast.
Right.
Which is a great option.
And I would say one of the difficulties of Soul is because a lot of times we're leaning into carrier plus fighters, those kinds of fleets, plus destroyers as well. Don't forget about the destroyers. They're important for graviton laser systems in order to soak hits. Otherwise, you've just got all these fighters that can be ignored in certain cases. But beyond that, because we're not talking about you being a Dreadnought faction, it means you'll never be quite as good as everybody else when it comes to fleet. And I mean the big fleet guys. I'm talking your L1Z1s, your Baronies, your Hakons, if they've really specialized in that. All those real big fleet factions are kind of not really going to struggle with you so much.
Yeah.
That is unless you're going after the Genesis. And one thing that I would say really goes real well with the Genesis is a Sarween yellow skip into Space Dock 2.
Yeah.
That way we can really, really pump out as many fighters as possible.
Right.
Soul is not like an essential, gotta have a forward space dock, otherwise you're an idiot type faction. It's certainly useful, and I think some people probably swear by the idea that you always have to have a forward dock.
Right.
I don't know that I feel that way personally, but if you've got the yellow skip and you feel like I'm ready to, and I've got Unveil Flagship, I might go for Space Dock 2 into Genesis plus more fighters than it is that you can shake a stick at. Basically.
Yeah, and the other advantage of that yellow skip after you've gotten Sarween is you can also get transit diodes, and I would never tech from Sarween to Graviton to transit, but if I have the yellow skip, transit is your game just got crazy as the Federation of Soul. You are going to fly off the chain. It is so awesome and fun, and if you want to just if you just want to have a game of Soul where you put a little bit of a handicap on and want to just have a crazy good time, forego everything else we've said about tech paths and go for transit, because that is a rip-roaring good time.
Right. If you've got transit, what's nice is that you can rely less on orbital drop, which means now you're just so stocked on command counters, and you're so well defended everywhere, and it's just not costing you those CCs. The downside of Soul is they get a lot of CCs, but they also have a lot to spend it on, which kind of neatly transitions into our pretty much only green skip recommendation, which is if you can skip Daxiv to Hyper early. I love that personally.
Yeah, do that for sure.
That's something I really like to do. I wish that it was that's something you could just depend on every game, but sadly, you kind of need to get your stuff figured out tech pretty early. So and also we're kind of describing what I would say is overall a not super aggressive Soul, meaning if your green skip is on the other side of the board, you got other things to focus on, bud.
Right. If you got a green skip adjacent to your home and round 2 could get Hyper, I would go Gravity Drive into Hyper, and then just figure out what upgrade you want to do after that, right?
Sure,
You now have 2 and 2, and you can get any of your upgrades and just whatever makes the most sense. But getting that Hyper in round 2 is a huge deal, because like we said earlier, you had 3 additional command counters per round because of Mechatol. Now you have 4 additional command counters per round. It's a big deal, and any additional influences is added to that. When you pop leadership, you can get 7 or 8 command counters. That's like totally crazy.
Completely insane.
So
red
let's
skip. We
talk
got
about,
anything for red skips?
No, absolutely not. We don't
No,
care.
let's just skip it.
You're not building units with bombardment, so you don't need plasma scoring. Plasma scoring into Duranium. Like, there's an argument for Duranium armor on your advanced carriers, but it takes too long to get there, so you're never going to do it. And you want destroyers, but your destroyers purely exist for graviton soak. You don't care that much about anti-fighter barrage. You can. There are situations, but you're probably not going that route.
Yeah, and also, like, I'm going to say, like, yeah, it would have to be some crazy situation where I had 2 red skips to even be like, I'll get Destroyer 2. I'm not gonna grab, what am I gonna do? Grab Magen and then go for Destroyer 2? Actually, that doesn't sound like the worst thing in the world.
Magen on Soul could be a thing if you have the PDS, but no, it's no. Stop it.
Yeah.
Blue skips, Hunter. Tell me why not blue skip?
We love all the blue tech for Soul, so there's just nothing that you need to skip. You started with anti-mass. Regardless of you having a blue skip or not, you need to go Grav Drive. And then once you've got Grav Drive, Fleet Logistics is great, and then Light Wave is also too good. Basically, the fact Fleet Logistics is a very weird blue tech because it's kind of the only one that situationally I'll be like, I don't really care about having Fleet Logistics with certain factions. But Soul, Fleet Logistics is very good. So now essentially all the blue tech are good. So there's really no reason to skip any of them. So effectively the blue skip is useless.
Yeah. With all of this tech stuff, we said it earlier of like once you get the core 3 upgrades and the 2 and 2 to get there. For me, though, I don't like researching tech at all after that. I want all of my money to be spent on units for the late game. Once I've finished that tech path that clinches that 3-unit upgrade for me, and you don't even have to do the 3rd upgrade. You can do the 3rd upgrade when it comes up. Maybe just have 2 upgrades and you're probably fine, although all 3 of the upgrades you have access to are great. So for me, after I get that 3rd upgrade, I stop teching at all, period, because I just want more stuff to defend myself now. I need more units. Your money is better served elsewhere. So all of this other stuff is super, super extraneous. I would only buy tech if I had like a crazy surplus. And even then, you want to save your trade goods for late game stage 2s. You want to be able to qualify for as many of those as possible. I would hate to spend trade goods on tech, and it's not the way I like to go. So for me, once I have Carrier 2, Fighter 2, and Spec Ops 2, I'm done. I don't get tech unless a very specific reason comes up.
Right. I stand by that. I think a lot of times, though, those reasons will come up.
Sure.
So, I mean, in that way, I don't think it's... I guess what I'll say is this. After any of the tech paths we listed, if you're like, yeah, I pretty much always get Fleet Logistics after that, I get you. And, like, I think that's valid.
I should make that caveat that Fleet Logistics and Lightwave have a huge, huge potential. If I'm getting any techs after my core, you're right. Fleet Logistics and Lightwave is, like, a crucial way to secure your late game. Lightwave deflectors alone, we haven't talked about it much, but if you're parked on Mechatol Rex with a carrier, Advanced Carrier 2 with Gravity Drive and Lightwave, you can go to anybody's home system that you want with 1 carrier and 8 fighters or, whatever combination of stuff. You can get places. You can go pretty much anywhere on the board. So it is worth continuing to go down blue. If you get lucky and get 4 in 1 color, I actually think that's great. I think people will disagree with me on that, but I think having 4 in blue to get Fleet Logistics and Lightwave is a perfectly good way to secure your late game. Yeah. It's still a risk of spending money on tech instead of units, but those are 2 very, very useful techs for you.
Awesome. So we're going to transition now into talking specifically about Soul as a trading faction. It's kind of weird talking about Soul as a trading faction because in the type of Soul that we're describing, you are not really going to you're not going to be an ideal trade partner.
No.
Because people are going to be pretty upset with your general Mechatol Rex play, which is why in general we're going to emphasize like try and speak up in the early game. Try and and make as many deals as you can with the military support promissory note. Don't lose any command tokens to it, but most people are pretty good about letting you, even like nice people sometimes, if you haven't even spent all of them, you can trade it to some trustworthy people and they'll wait, basically.
Yeah. That's your biggest thing, is try to, if anything, it's some people don't want to look like a jerk by making you lose it. If you give it to them and be like, I'd really appreciate it if you waited until I spent all these tokens. If you frame it that way, the only people that are going to definitely do it to you are the people who are like, no, screw you. And then you kind of have a little bit of a meta advantage against them of like, wow, this person was, you get to look at the rest of the table and be like, they're being kind of brutal to me. I'm just trying to make a trade buddy. And sometimes that works. It's little pieces of the meta that can work in your favor in that regard.
And I would say that what's interesting about talking about trading is that if things are going poorly for you as far as this specific plan that we're laying out here, you should kind of revert to emphasizing the fact that you have 4 commodities. That should be like your kind of main thing. If it's like, all right, well, I'm not having a Mechatol Rex game, so I would like the trade strategy card, please, and I would like to make lots of money in order to pump out lots of fighters, and just kind of spreading my influence as much as possible. Honestly, if Soul doesn't have the Mechatol Rex chip, they kind of, to me, play sort of like Ghosts, but if Ghost was like had real beefy boys, like a beefy boy Ghost.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's about getting kind of all over the place, but also getting all over the place in the service of making lots and lots of trade partners to make lots and lots of money. Who are your favorite people to trade with, your factions to trade with? Obviously, trading with anybody is great, but is there anyone you're looking for?
Well, I would say I don't know if there's any specific factions to trade with outside of I think military support for Jolnar's research agreement is always super dope if you can make that happen. But I personally, with Soul, always try and hunt for an early support for the throne. You are a faction that is going to make some risky Mechatol Rex plays, meaning that it's good to try and do a support swap with a faction that naturally might be able to unseat you in the late game. I'm thinking your Muats, your Baronies, your L1s, and your Yin Brotherhoods. These factions that excel in either lots of bombardment, bypassing your PDS, or the Yin are just kind of the only faction that are really excel at taking things from you, and not necessarily Mechatol Rex with a huge stack of your dudes on it, but a Yin in your slice is not as scared of your 3 or 4 dudes on a planet, basically.
Right. Yeah, Yin might not take out your big stack, but they'll take out everything else you've got if they want to.
Right.
I want to also just super stress the importance of that very, very early support for the throne swap. The biggest thing is it's going to happen. People do support for the throne swaps. And if you're not the first one to make an offer, you may never get your offer out. Because if it happens, if you don't do your support for the throne till round 4, you're probably too close to the head of the pack that nobody will do it with you at that point. So if you are the first one, if you make the offer in round 2, you're sitting on Mechatol Rex, you're probably adjacent to almost everyone. If you find someone to offer it to in round 2 and can get them to take you up on it, lots of people are opposed to doing it that early, but you start offering it that early because you might lose your chances after about round 3. So I think it's very important
if things
to
are
get
going
that
well
free
for
point.
you. Right. The another alternate support for the throne swap could be, all right, maybe I failed at getting Mechatol Rex in the early game. However, in the mid game, I'm seeing an opening. But how about I try and do a swap first, basically?
Yes, secure my position.
That's another good timing for it. So basically, I say that because Soul is trying to win from ahead and win quickly, they are a faction that, if we can do a support for the throne swap, that will be awesome. It's kind of a little more difficult to do it with them than it is to do it with one of the more underdog factions. Yeah. But, everybody's got their own meta, and if you can make yourself appear a certain way or build up enough goodwill, maybe you make a very favorable military support trade early on and somebody really appreciates that, maybe try and get that into a support for the throne swap.
Let's talk about what all of this has kind of been gearing up towards, which is what we do in the mid game.
Yeah.
The mid game is weird, but I think we want to just summarize it in what the whole kind of goal. We've talked about trading, we've talked about tech. We get what we're doing in that process, but why? What are we gearing up for?
Right.
And our biggest proposal is you are gearing up for a round 4 or round 5 Imperial swing round. We've talked about swings in the past. That's when you get Imperial and you score 2 objectives and maybe the Mechatol point. You get a bunch of points and people just, you either blow everybody out of the water or you make this big come from behind, knock into, now you're in first place where you were in last. But this is very possible for you if you let's go with our politics round 1 game, right? We took politics. Round 2 we took leadership. Round 3 we took something that secured just our position in general. We just needed tech, right? I don't know, we needed tech. Round 4 we take politics so that round 5 we can take Imperial.
Right. And so one of the things that is important about this strategy is that you're provoking people into blocking you as far as Imperial goes. So try and get people to do it, because what we're trying to do is get our secrets locked down in the mid game.
Yes.
Which means you might need to cycle some of your secret objectives out. So that's probably my favorite thing about trying to take Mechatol Rex early is the idea is not to get it and then sneak into Imperial right away. The idea is to really get the rest of the table to be like, all right, we have to block him from getting Imperial. So they take Imperial. You do the secondary every time you can. Get 3 secret objectives in your hand, all scoreable, and just score those simple, easy publics. We're going to end up getting ahead if we do this, but not crazy ahead. Maybe like a point ahead. Maybe you got the Custodian's point, and then maybe everybody else traded support for the throne, so it kind of evened out. We'll see, One of the main things that you really need to accomplish in this phase of the game is you need to get a PDS on Mechatol Rex. What we're looking for is a stack of Spec Ops with PDS. You need that PDS so that you can't get bombarded. That's one of the big the big disadvantages of playing as Soul is bombardment really kind of wrecks your day. As far as everyone else's PDS, you need to be careful to build destroyers so that they can soak hits. We've kind of already talked about that a little bit, but it definitely is important to note that you are not going to have these like giant fleets. We're going to really rely on the carrier and fighter solution, which means that factions like Extra, other factions that like Mentak is a good one to think of that might have PDS networks with Graviton laser systems. I know the very first game I played as Soul, Matt, you shredded me with Graviton laser system.
Yeah, we didn't know how good PDS were yet, and it was just a huge shocking moment of you lost everything.
Right. It's still embarrassing to this day. So the idea is to kind of time it out. We're trying to score our publics, and we're also trying to play very defensive. This is about taking Mechatol, keeping our slice, gumming up the works, orbital dropping as much as possible, building units, and securing our spot.
The most defining feature of your mid game, especially like mid game leading into late game, is people are aiming at you all game. I mean, like literally, probably from round 3 forward, you're gonna get attacked at least once. I think the biggest problem with Soul, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, we can even kind of start getting into it, is talking about these meta problems that happen around the mid game, which is people don't like you. You're in the lead, and not only are you in the lead, but because you are Soul in the lead, they know that's a bigger threat than anybody else being in the lead. If Mentak is tied with you for lead, Soul's the bigger problem here. Mentak we can deal with, but Soul we might not be able to deal with, which means for me the biggest issue, and the reason we keep talking about you're not like a great trade partner, is if you and someone else make an equivalent offer, they will take the other person's trade most of the time. Because you're Soul. Why would they do the trade with you when they could get the exact same stuff for somebody who isn't as scary of a force? That's why you need to trade early. You need to trade at you when people aren't looking at you funny. In round 3 or 4, people start looking at you funny, and you can't get your trades off anymore. So that's why you're doing all the orbital dropping, and why you're always building units and securing is because you're gonna get hurt. You need to plan to get hurt. Don't be surprised when people start getting into your stuff. You can still be mad at them, and you can try to work the meta against them and be like, they're only attacking me. This is ridiculous. I'm tied with so-and-so. I'm not anymore in a lead. But the whole point is you have to find a way to hold yourself against the people attacking you.
Right. I really emphasize gum when I play Soul now. I feel like
I wish I did. I need to. I'm glad you're saying that, because that's something I need to incorporate more into my own game.
I mean, I think that's the main, that to me, besides Fighter 2 making my fighters better, the fact that it allows me to gum so easily is kind of my favorite aspect of it. So for me, when I was saying in the tech path, like, oh, you got to get Fighter 2, it is because I'm planning on gumming up the works and making it difficult for people to attack me, because a lot of times Soul players won't win a lot of space battles.
Yep.
They'll hold planets underneath people. But like, you just kind of have to accept that, well, you're not going to be ahead on that game, basically.
Yeah.
The fact that you're going for Mechatol Rex in general means that your priorities are kind of specific, and you're spending a lot of command counters, which translates to money, really, on orbital drop and getting an amount of spec ops on planets that other people just can't. People just can't match you. Another thing I think I want to emphasize real quick that you probably need to work on is your action card hand. There is going to be a point in the mid to late game where there are certain cards that you're just kind of guaranteed to face if you're playing this game. Plague, I think, is one of them.
Yeah.
Reactor Meltdown, if you have a space dock on Mechatol Rex or a forward dock. If you have a PDS on Mechatol Rex, Crippled Defenses is probably one you can count on.
Yep.
What are some other ones, Matt?
Uprising is one. If you have an infantry stack on a hazardous planet, that's always a threat.
That's Unstable Planet that you're thinking of.
I get them backwards. Both of them are not great, and the one that kills your infantry sucks. So
what this means is you are kind of action. You have a vulnerability to action cards, which means we need to work on your hand. We need to have a pretty good hand ourselves. A sabotage would be great. If you can buy a sabotage off of a con, believe me, you should. It would be crazy if they sold it to you, but I don't know. Maybe they will.
Can I say something about that sabotage too, though?
Yeah.
Save one sabotage all game. Hold on to it. No, don't let it go for anything if you can help it, because that sabotage is what protects you from public disgrace in your final round. Right. When you need to do your Imperial swing, unless you get your own public disgrace, then your sabotage becomes a little bit safer. But in general, the worst thing that can happen to you is you planned all game for this round 5 Imperial take. You take Imperial, someone is too threatened by you, they play public disgrace, you don't get to draw Imperial anymore. Right. But if you have a sabotage, you have absolutely nothing to worry about. So when I play Soul, I fish for that sabotage, and I hold on to it, and I don't care what everybody else does to me. You can keep attacking me, you can take all my stuff. I am hinging on holding my home system and Mechatol Rex, and that's it. That's the only part that is crucial to my plan. Right. In this final round. Right. So you need to hold on to that sabotage.
Right. I think it kind of feels like we're already just sort of in the late game now. So let's talk about it. Matt, you have one specific tech that you kind of swear by in the late game as far as Soul goes.
I do, and I think part of bringing this tech up is to say you are probably ahead. And you need to be okay with being ahead. I think Soul wins from ahead. And one way to help yourself along in finalizing some stuff is, like we talked about earlier, end up with Lightwave Deflector. Again, you're in the center of the board with 3 movement carriers. You can go wherever you want. And if there comes a situation where everyone's jumping on you and you need to abandon ship and go find points elsewhere, Lightwave is how you get out of there. I've had plenty of times where, as Soul, I'm on Mechatol, and then I end up getting surrounded on Mechatol. Right. They cut me off, and I have a decent chunk of stuff on Mechatol, but now I have nowhere to go. Lightwave is your get-out-of-jail-free card, and you need to maybe plan on getting it. Depends on how the table's been going against you and everything, but around 3 or 4 tech get to help you get Lightwave is very helpful. I don't know. I'm a little bit nervous to like straight up recommend Lightwave, but I want you to keep it in mind as something that could help you for when the tides turn against you, because you will be ahead, and the whole point of this strategy as Soul is to be okay with being ahead and finding ways to get out of the way, finding ways to stop people from hurting you and everything.
There's a pretty good episode of this podcast called Space Cats Peace Turtles you could check out called How to Win from Ahead. That I think would probably be very relevant to this conversation in general.
Yeah.
I wonder how much we talked about Soul, but whatever.
Yeah, I don't know. Your biggest goal here, you have 2 timing windows you're really trying to hit in terms of winning the game. Again, Imperial on round 5, where you took Politics round 4, is kind of like the best get.
That's
you
like
can
the
do.
dream scenario.
That's the dream.
Basically.
That's the dream for every faction. That's why it's kind of tricky, is because whoever ends up getting that Politics in round 4, that's now the issue that you have to deal with. But if you get Imperial round 5, you are trying to either win in round 5, which is typically before most people can beat you,
right?
Or you're looking to have your swing round in round 5, set up a scenario where you cannot be stopped in round 6. I
think that
points in
scenario
the bag.
That's more likely.
Definitely more common. And so your goal in round 2 is to take something like Diplo. I'm not round 2. In round 6, you're trying to get Diplo or leadership, or maybe Imperial again. I wouldn't count on that. But if you can win in the action phase, that's great. But in general, you want to be in a situation where the only way people can stop you is if they take out your home system, and you want to make that basically impossible to do.
Right.
In a few situations, you can have a thing where you need to take out somebody else. Someone else is racing you for the win, and you have it if they don't win. That's where Lightwave becomes especially useful, right? Is if someone has been keeping toe-to-toe with you all game, and it's you or them, and they're ahead of you in initiative order, you got to find a way to crush them.
Yeah.
So Lightwave's a good way to do that. Fleet Logistics is a great way to do that. All these things you've been gearing up for all game are a good way to attack them, hurt them, do a lot of damage.
I want to call out something we haven't talked about very much in this episode, which is the flagship, the Genesis. I think we kind of nailed it early on in just saying like, oh, we both kind of feel like it's a little bit of a win more. But frequently in the late game, building the Genesis and stocking it with fighters is going to be a pretty solid, like, you can't touch my home system right now because 12 capacity is just hard to match. Like, that's just difficult.
Right.
The other thing that's good about the flagship is, generally speaking, because you're Soul, people are going to attack you a lot. Like, you're probably going to have more than average just kind of scrapes with other people, meaning that generally there's going to be fleets near your home system, even in the mid game. And if you happen to get Unveil Flagship, that's not the worst problem to have. And the Genesis is a great flagship to score that point with. Even if I had Unveil Flagship and I was just like, you know what, I'm going to save this for a kind of late game surprise win to kind of catch people off guard.
Yeah.
I'm not even super against that because the Genesis is such a reliable flagship. The only reason it's not incorporated more into our play is it just doesn't feel like it's plugging any holes for Soul.
Definitely not. It is that kind of win more thing. But I guess the biggest point is if you get Unveil Flagship, don't be afraid of that. A lot of factions, you get Unveil Flagship and you're kind of like, crap. How am I going to make this work? Right. Soul doesn't have that problem at all. And it's very nice to be in that situation, honestly. And the biggest thing is in this late game scenario, that's a great way to finish things out, right? The best thing you can do is win off of an action phase secret objective that people couldn't stop you doing. Right. So having this surprise swing out with your flagship that's mostly just been in your home system defending, but now suddenly gets to do something bigger, that's a great finishing move.
Mm-hmm. I agree. In fact, I love those games where I built my flagship in my home and people aren't even thinking it's Unveil Flagship. They think it's just because I'm trying to defend myself. Yeah. And then they basically start coming towards my home system to stop me. And then, that's a wonderful, beautiful end to a game. What are some late game problems? I don't even know where to start, actually.
Yeah. We've been talking about it all game. The biggest thing is you're getting punched constantly. Right. But the real problem is, first off, we should talk about Nalu just a little bit.
Yeah, probably.
Nalu has that initiative thing that makes them very good in the late game scenarios.
They're very good at winning games quickly. Like anytime your plan as a faction is like, oh, we're just gonna try and get the game done with as fast as we can. Well, Nalu, you can't win faster than Nalu. Basically,
right.
It's impossible.
Right. And so Nalu has this tech called Neuroglaive, and that makes it very difficult to deal with them once they have like a win secured. This is just another check on the list of why to get Lightwave Deflector, because Lightwave Deflector is kind of a direct counter to Neuroglaive. Obviously, you're still going to lose one fleet supply, but you've been swimming in command counters. You banked a few extra in fleet supply, and now you only have to activate like their home system from Mechatol Rex. You send the whole kit and caboodle over there. You should be fine. Like I'm actually not that afraid of Nalu, aside from the fact that they just will be ahead of me in initiative order. But if I set up for it properly, if I see that Nalu all game has been toe-to-toe with me, I need to set up for that late game scenario where I can do something about them, right? That's what you're paying attention to in the mid game and the early late game, is who's right there with me, and what am I going to have to do if it's between me and them? What do I need to have so that I can do something about them?
Right. And what, basically everything else is gravy? No, that's not true. It's gonna be rough. I think a lot of late game Soul stuff is I feel like very difficult. It's odd because when we started covering this game, Soul was considered the very obviously like kind of de facto best faction next to Jolnar. But now I feel like something has happened, which is that the meta has just kind of taken note and is just like, Soul's really scary. And now, more often than not, they just get a lot of heat. So you need to be ready for that. And you need to try and execute everything as efficiently as you possibly can. Right. Soul is very good at this like one specific thing. Yeah. But if you mess it up, then you will not win.
Don't take the weird, risky maneuvers. Just don't do them. Find another way to get the points. You are about safe, controlled points over crazy, risky points.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're like well, it's funny because earlier I said you're like Ghosts with beefy boys, but you're like but Ghosts can actually like swing out for wild points, right? Somewhat. You can't really do that so much. And yeah, we're all about taking Mechatol Rex and just trying to play really solid and be as in a nice defensive stance with our slice, and hopefully we will just be able to get the points together so quickly that it will be too late by the time everyone can stop us, basically.
But Hunter, what if we're wrong?
Well, we might be, which is why we have done some pre-errata, and let's go to that now. Let's go to that.
Let's talk about the way. So we've been talking about this with people on our Discord, and there are people who just have staunch opposition to how we're approaching this. And it's important for you, dear listener, to know what maybe your alternatives are. If you have a different type of meta, maybe it's all a Hunter and Matt thing, and maybe your meta is just works differently and you can get away with different types of things. So let's talk about what other people have had to say about the Federation of Soul. We want to give some quick shout outs to people that we're not going to specifically use what they said, but they were contributing to the conversation in great, interesting ways that helped inform a lot of stuff we've been talking about already, but also played into the conversations that the rest of this errata comes from. I want to call out Latharus, Rogue, Rough Fudge, that's super great, and Anti. You three had some great points. We're not specifically referencing them, but it was a part of a larger conversation. Let's hit up our first one, which is from Brian, the blogger of Meme Town. He says, Soul, with Warfare, round 1, can eat someone's home system. And you say they shouldn't eat 2 slices because they'll get attacked all day, but they'll already get attacked all day, so whatever. This is a dangerous proposal from Brian, but falls in line to me with what we're proposing more generally speaking, right?
Right. I think that this definitely sounds possible to play Soul this aggressively. It's hard to imagine, though, that you don't just kind of get backdoored by your other neighbor.
Yeah.
I don't know that they really have the... that just sounds like a lot to control. Mechatol Rex is one thing. It's in the center of the map, and it's not crazy far away from it. I mean, it's the same distance as another home system, but at the very least, it's not something where the second you take Mechatol Rex, it puts any of the players on super high alert. The second you take someone else's home system, you are enemy number one for at least that player.
Brian also is a math nut and had something else to say. I want to say one thing too about that is I just agree with the sentiment in general that you're going to get attacked kind of no matter what you do. So it's okay sometimes to lean into things that get you attacked.
Right.
But from a math heavy note, if someone brings 1 dreadnought with plasma scoring and 2 infantry, their odds of them successfully taking a planet from you as Sol with 3 spec ops, just ones, not even spec ops 2, but their plan is to bombard and then win a 2v1 or whatever, is less than 25%. Therefore, until round 3-ish, until your mid-game, 3 or more infantry on a planet is basically more than anyone else can deal with.
Right.
So that's another slot of why we want to orbital drop as much as we can early on, because that's what defends us. People aren't going to see any value in attacking your stuff early if they know they can't get the planets. So what's even the point of taking out the ships? The only time people do the big stuff is in the later game when it's like, I have to do something about Sol. But in the early game, you can secure your position just by getting more and more and more infantry down and making your stuff very, very just not useful for people to even make the attempt at trying to take.
Right. I really like just the specific call out of 3. 3 is such a good number of duders, and I think it's very easy for people to listen to us talk about this and think like, oh, I just need to do orbital drop like a crazy excessive amount of times. We're talking about doing it like, you know, a couple times per round max. Like that's like the most we're talking about. And that's like in the mid game once you've got like a healthy supply of command counters, hopefully. But yeah, don't take what we're saying and run with it to such an extent that like you're basically hamstringing yourself by only doing orbital drop and you have like 5 or 6 guys on like every planet. Like, I'm not even sure that's really possible, but just I would hate someone to hear this and think like, oh, they said do orbital drop a bunch, and it's like, but 3 is pretty good for a while.
3 is good for a while. You want to make sure you still have actions available. You still want to do lots of other stuff. Orbital drop is just kind of in service of stalling out so that you could do other stuff while equally defending yourself. RJ King had quite a lot to say. RJ King kind of very much opposes what we've laid out here today. He probably listened to this. RJ, if you're out there, I know you listened to this and you went, I disagree. Here's RJ's thing. In games I have been in, when they do that being, take Mechatol, take the early lead, who cares? RJ says that the table guts them and they lose. They are good, but they're not good enough to stop 5 other players who can see their win 3 rounds ahead of time. But I have been in a few games where Sol stayed tied in 2nd or 3rd all game and swung into the win. They have a lot of flexibility with objectives other races don't have, so I think swing rounds are easier for them.
I think that's really valid.
It is.
Like, and I think we kind of laid that out as like, if Mechatol Rex is unavailable to you, then that's kind of what you have to play at.
Yeah, we see it as the backup plan more than the plan.
Right. I don't know that this feels like maybe a meta problem and less a mechanical problem, though.
Maybe.
I feel like the idea that we're kind of laying out here is that you are kind of in this Venn diagram of doing things quickly and also being good at holding Mechatol Rex.
Yeah.
And maybe we've made a huge mistake here. Maybe the problem is that we can't resist. There's this carrot hanging, and we can't resist grabbing for it. But I gotta say, in a lot of the games where I did not play boldly as Sol, I lost, including a game against RJ King,
right,
at Gen Con, where I specifically was like, I'll not go for Mechatol, and then it wasn't working out for me. And then about midway through that game, I was like, all right, I'm going to make a play for Mechatol. Someone left it open. And then RJ used Plague on me, and that was kind of it. He got a very good Plague. By the way, Matt, Plague is a very good card.
Whoa, slow down. Stop it. I
Plague
won't even
is very
listen.
good.
I won't listen. Nope.
But he was using loaded die, obviously. Which that's how he did it.
So the biggest point here that I think RJ brings up that I want to make the counter argument against is talking about, yes, you do have the flexibility with objectives, but what I think Hunter and I have laid out is the more solid mechanical method to winning, and hinges on how badly does the meta strike against you, and that's where your bad luck can come up. But what I think RJ is proposing, and what has happened to me, what my experience with RJ's method has been, you rely a lot more on getting lucky secret objectives. You in RJ's method, you're not getting any extra points outside of the objectives, which means you need the objectives to work for you. Obviously, Soul's advantage is that a lot of the objectives do work for you, but there are plenty that don't. So you're rolling the dice on whether or not you get the right objectives, whether or not the right stage 2 comes up, and whether or not you get 3 good secret objectives. I had a game where I chose not to go Mechatol and was trying to get lots of secret objectives, and the first 3 secret objectives I drew were absolutely terrible for me. More or less, like, not impossible. I'll almost never say impossible, but would have taken such extreme effort from me that I would have given up my ability to do anything else. And so I don't like leaning on that luck of getting good secret objective draws when I could lean on free points and plan for people attacking me and just defending well enough that doesn't hurt me too bad. Because he says you're not good enough to stop all 5 players from hurting you, but the reality is all 5 players are not going to attack you constantly nonstop all game. You'll get like 2 people that don't leave you alone and 3 others that maybe attack you once at random intervals.
Sure. Or that those 5 other it's hard to get 5 players to all agree to do one specific thing.
And ideally, one of those players you have a support for the throne swap with. So you've checked that list off. Now it's 4. One of them is across the table from you and not in a position to do anything about it. Like you need to set up this is what the gum is important for. We are making a plan to have it where those players don't have an easy path to stopping us.
Right. And also, I think in general, it's kind of hard to purposely stay like I think the part that's hard to it would be hard to put into our guide a idea of like specifically trying to stay tied in second or third. You know what I mean? Like how do you specifically measure out your game experience and hold back to such an extent, but not too much so that the other players don't just kind of finish the game off for you? Because the thing is, too, generally speaking, if you're not the guy on Mechatol Rex, then somebody else is.
Yes, definitely. And also to talk about what you're saying there with like staying in a certain position, maybe this is a flaw of me as a player, but if I have an opportunity to score a point, I'm not gonna just not score a point that I have access to. I won't. I often stretch too thin for other points, and I need to reel that in a little bit. But in general, like I feel like if you are making a point to stay within a range of victory points, you would at some point as Soul have to be like, well, I have the tech, but I just am not going to score it this round. I'm just not going to score it because I don't want to be in the front of the pack. It's so easy to score as Soul. You're almost guaranteed to be at the front of the pack.
Yeah.
Even without Mechatol.
Now, to RJ King's credit, though, this is what he is saying is very consistent with what we have seen in the community. It's weird. Soul has this reverence as like being this very, very strong faction, but they did not fare too hot as far as we can tell in like very experienced games.
Yeah.
Which I actually think just might be a feature of the faction. I think people are maybe, I think in a weird way, Soul might be overestimated a little bit.
Absolutely.
They are a very like kind of clear cut, kind of elegant faction. But I think if players are finding that, like in more experienced circles, Soul doesn't fare that well, it could just be a meta thing, but it also could be that maybe this faction is not the end all be all that they have been described as.
Yeah.
I personally think that for some reason we have all kind of gotten Nalu and Soul kind of switched in our heads.
Right. Nalu wins way more often than Soul does, and we do not see Nalu get under just like the most intense heat every single game.
Yeah, the meta against Nalu feels very chill as compared to Soul, where it feels very, very hot. But I think those out there that have such a strong meta against Soul, I just want to let you guys know, you're doing a good job. Like,
You should do that.
It's effective. I just always wonder why Nalu is not on the same list because, that's where I would. And I feel like I lately have been trying to push more meta against Nalu and not really getting a lot of people, I feel like, on the same page.
Yeah. Let's segue into Schroeder's point. Schroeder says, I ultimately feel like there are two souls. One soul is what we've been describing all day, which he describes as, screw you, I got mine, which is the take a lead, whatever. They'll deal with it. You'll figure it out. You'll handle yourself. Number two is everyone's got ground forces, but I've got all of the money. What that means is you are selling.
No. He says, but I got all them money, yo.
You got all the money, yo. What he's referring to is selling military support all the time.
Right.
He's talking about our backup plan more than anything. But Schroeder says the latter requires a meta where you can make trades and thus tends to require you are not super far ahead. But it is, at the very least, a good fallback for when you don't have a secure Mechatol path. Did someone get there first, or do you think you won't get the point from Imperial? Well, you can be the economic powerhouse instead. And we kind of incorporated this idea into our guide some, and I think it builds off of what RJ said as well, which is just to say, if Mechatol Rex becomes a problem for you that you can't handle, you do have this economic backup plan that works quite well if you push it in the right ways. And there's something to be said for gunning for that early and then taking Mechatol in like round 3 or 4 if the opportunity, presents itself. But that's trickier to predict. So it's easier to just take and hold. But there's certainly you can be the economic powerhouse. It is possible if you are not the as threatening version of Sol.
Right. I really like this description, and it's a very Schroeder description. It's funny because I feel like Schroeder always makes a way. He always turns any faction he plays, he can turn into an economic powerhouse.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? Like, I'll never forget that Sardak Nor game where it just felt like I don't even know what faction it is that I'm looking at because they're unrecognizable
from Sardak.
So I feel like we could probably have Schroeder pre-errata every faction and be like, did you know that you can actually just trade all of everything that this faction has and become an economic powerhouse? But no. But Sol is a 4 commodity faction, and they have a very good promissory note. It's very true. I think me and Matt are still kind of just on the more active and less passive side when it comes to Sol. I think I think also I need to see this played very well because I have not seen this like I recognize the potential there, and I've seen some people kind of lean into that with some success. But I haven't really seen a lot of like Sol, like kind of laying back, just working on getting a lot of trade goods and like then kind of going after things in the mid and late game.
I'd love to give it another go where I try to take trade as often as possible and all of that. I didn't get a fair shake at it, I don't feel like, and I did try. But it's hard to predict who else is going to be at your table. If I tried to be economic powerhouse Sol and Schroeder was at my table, it's not going to work because Schroeder's going to be the economic powerhouse at the table, and everyone's going to deal with Schroeder, and I won't get a word in edgewise.
Right.
So it's very, very meta dependent on if you can make this definitely work.
Yeah, and I think me and you are both coming into this guide from a very there's a lot of anti-Sol meta out there, and we are kind of trying to emphasize how you should respond to it, but yet still go after a lot of the same goals. Right. That's essentially what we're trying to do, is update the old guide by saying, yes, people know about this, but here's kind of the best way we can figure for you to execute the plan. And I realize people hearing that are like, well, this not a very good plan, but I think Blarknob kind of puts it best, kind of puts the bow on this conversation. Blarknob says, Sol has a lot of raw power, 0 disadvantages, and the most straightforward tech path. Beginners can just stumble into a big win with them by following the signposts on their faction sheet. I think that is probably the best way to describe Sol, basically. Yeah. They're powerful, no disadvantages, and it's just obvious what to do. So, I mean, if maybe some of the more experienced players that that follow us are listening to this episode and they're like, oh, this like didn't tell me a lot of new stuff. There's a reason we're starting this project again with Soul.
Yeah,
because
definitely.
they are the ones that it is so fun and also just kind of easy to like dig into them and describe what exactly you should do with Soul and what you can expect to see happen in response to it. So I think if maybe this wasn't quite your cup of tea, as we talk about other factions, it's gonna get messier. It's gonna get more
Definitely.
it's gonna get less completely planned out.
Well,
and ultimately more theory crafty.
Yeah, and the big thing with that too is, if anything, I mean, the point of a strategy guide, the whole reason we're doing these is more for newer players, people who don't get to play all the time. When we're talking to these players who play Tabletop Simulator 3 times a week, like, yeah, you guys are in a different world. You're in a whole different ball game. All these people who are our routine tournament finalists, you are playing a different game that sometimes these strategy guys won't adhere to, because what you're playing is a game that can't have a strategy guide, if that makes sense.
Right.
You are playing against players that all know each other's strategies, which means all you are constantly trying to do is subvert their expectations and change something up about your strategy, because that's the only way you're going to win. So yeah, at absolute top, highest echelon play, this Soul Guide might not get you there because people can see your signposts and know how to thwart you. Right. But in anything less than that, you're probably going to have a decently fair shake.
Right. I agree. And I think our guides in general are going to try and be kind of a midway point between those.
I think so.
Not completely beginner. Like, honestly...
they're informed by experienced players. We have now
Yes.
watched many of these players play many times, and we have seen things that have worked very, very well for them, and we're trying to be informed by those things, because you and I, in the first round strategy guides, we were just going off of our own games, and it was wholly dependent on our own meta at that time. Now we get to see a bit more of the global meta and make more informed decisions for that.
Yeah. And I actually really enjoy this, and I hope that every single guide will basically be us describing exactly how we view a certain faction for a while, and then kind of bringing in the naysayers for that moment, and then just kind of having this great back and forth. And
Absolutely.
I want to say thank you I want to thank Brian, RJ King, Schroeder, and Blark Knob for just giving us those points that were really, really useful for this part of the discussion. I just want to go ahead and especially thank RJ King for really just not disagreeing so strongly, because it's good for us to have
It
this.
is.
And I think that's what
he
makes
stuck
the
to
game
his
so much
guns.
fun.
He's the only person who kind of like very, very, very strongly opposed what we were trying to put forward, and he never backed down, and we never had a confrontational argument about it. It was just like a, let's continue to grow what we both understand about this, and I loved it. It was a really great conversation where I definitely gained a lot from it in how to reshape what I think about Soul and how to deal with those meta issues. That there is potentially an alternative, and the idea that there being an alternative can inform what you are doing, even in your own strategy.
Yeah. I am interested now in watching someone play Soul and not playing myself, because I am tired of
I'm
playing.
done. I'm done playing Soul for as long as I possibly can.
Yep. So that's it. That's the energy we're gonna end this episode on. Love you. Bye. Anyways, rate us, please. Please rate us on your podcast and app of choice, especially Apple Podcasts / iTunes. Rate us on Hot or Not as well. We're on that. We're on Tinder. I made a Tinder for us, and it's me on it, but it's called Space Cats Peace Turtles, and if you match with me, we're gonna play a game somewhere. Anyways, check out our Twitter. It's called Space Cats Pod, and it's got game updates there, and we try and shoot stuff at people and just be like, hey,
we're trying to gear up more streaming, and a lot of times the streaming announcements are there. So if you want to catch live streams, that's like one of the best places to find out if a stream is popping up, because sometimes we're trying to get a little bit more into a routine with them. So that's a really great way to find out when our schedule of stream games is coming.
Yeah, Gen Con kind of messed it up, but now we're kind of getting to the point where we're starting to build the schedule back up again.
Yeah.
So I would expect to see more content on that. And on our Twitch, we should also check out our Twitch, which is also just called Space Cats Peace Turtles. So go ahead and follow that for whenever we go live or whatever.
Yeah.
Check out our Facebook. You can get some announcements there. And it's also a good place to send us messages if you have like rules questions or stuff like that. The subreddit Twilight Imperium is a place where we post weekly, and there's also some discussion there. Patreon, check it out. We got one. There are lots of different tiers with lots of different services. And one of those services that that you get by not even being in the Patreon is episodes that are excess of 2 hours. My brain is starting to scramble.
I'm exploding.
Check out the Discord for fun conversations. You can have fun conversations with other people. You can have fun conversations with Matt. And if you call me out publicly, I'll say, "Hey, what up?" That's my contribution to that. But I also want to say, in general, there is a day coming forward, hopefully, where I will have more free time, and some of that free time will be me trying to be on the Discord more. So there's that. That's weird. So you can just kind of sit and hope that maybe that will happen if that's something that you want to do.
And that's it.
Okay. That's
We're
it.
sleepy. We're sleepy. We haven't had an episode like this in a long time, intentionally so, but we were not going to split this one up. So there you go. You get your 2-hour episode, you lucky so-and-so.
You lucky so-and-so. We prepped this episode for hours, and it took 2 hours to record it.
It is 10:40. I started a Soul game this morning at 9 a.m. I have been Twilight Imperium for 13 hours and 40 minutes. Good night.
Good night. Hey, good night, and good soul luck. Nope. I wanted to have a bit. I wanted to have something good to go out on. That wasn't good. Good night and good Chuck.
Good Chuck?
Shut up. There's nothing more to see here.
Thank you for listening to Space Cats Peace Turtles, and thanks to Ben Prunty for the use of his music. You can find more at benpruntymusic.com and benprunty.bandcamp.com. Pax Magnifica, Bellum Gloriosum.